Michael, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this. So I'm a lecturer in philosophy at Cleveland State University, and I teach the history of philosophy courses there, so ancient, medieval, modern. But my research focuses primarily on Plato and then Neo-Platonism, so ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, but really most of what I publish on is either Plato or Neo-Platonism. I guess with Plato, I work primarily on his metaphysics in the so-called late dialogues or the more advanced dialogues. And then I guess I published on the main Neoplatonists I've worked on are Plotinus, Pseudo-Dionysius, and then Boethius. So I guess for our discussion today, right, my work on Neoplatonism is most relevant since it's the Neoplatonists who really talk about God or the divine and sort of build their whole philosophy around that. Full disclosure, I'm a practicing Catholic. So, these are my actual views. I consider my philosophical views to be Platonist. And it's the kind of views, Neoplatonism, just for people who aren't aware of it, since it's not that well known, the original or sort of earliest philosophy in all the major Western monotheistic traditions today, like Islam, Judaism, Christianity, the earliest philosophers in those traditions are Neoplatonists. And so that's the sort of, this is the view that I take for things. And then I guess finally, one last thing as introduction, because I've listened to a few of your other videos on here. And so listening to the other philosophers you had on. And yeah, I guess I approach philosophy a little bit differently than some of the other people I heard. I mean, I didn't listen to every video you ever done, obviously, because you've done a lot. But yeah, my training is not really in the analytic philosophy tradition. So I don't know contemporary analytic philosophy really well. I was more, originally trained in continental philosophy and then got into the history of philosophy from there. And so I won't be surprised if we end up talking a lot about defining basic terms in our discussion, just to make sure that we're understanding each other. So yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Cool. So tell me about the Neoplatonic argument for God, and how is it? What specifically is Neoplatonism versus regular Platonism?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the Neoplatonism versus regular Platonism thing. So I guess first of all, both of these terms have pretty broad meanings. Like, you could be a Platonist, but Platonists disagree among themselves about a bunch of issues, right? So Platonist just means you follow Plato in some sense. And of course, scholars radically disagree on how to interpret Plato. So that essentially can mean anything, right? Like being a Platonist. Although in contemporary analytic philosophy, it tends to mean where you think that like abstract objects exist or something. That's really, I don't find that kind of terminology or way of thinking helpful for talking about what Plato actually thought. So my own views about Plato do not really line up with that perfectly. But yeah, so Platonism and contemporary philosophy sort of is a view about the existence of abstract objects or something. The Neoplatonists, who called themselves Platonists, they're philosophers, really, I guess Plotinus is usually considered the first one. And so they're in late antiquity. I think Plotinus is 3rd century AD. And so it's a tradition that comes out of that where they're looking at Plato and they're trying to sort of systematize it, but they systematize it in a very like theological way where it's really like all focused on the one or God or the good. And so it's a certain way of interpreting Plato. Again, I don't take the Neoplatonists to be like this is just the right way to interpret Plato. I think they're doing a slightly different thing, although they're working within a framework of the Platonic dialogues to do it. That's what their inspiration is. So I don't know much more to say about that. But yeah, I guess to your first question there about the Platonic argument, in a way, I don't even know if this should be called an argument for God's existence, because it's not an argument in the sense of there's premises and conclusions exactly. That's just not how they operated when they talked about God. And like we'll probably see in the discussion here, there's various reasons for that. But I'll sort of just tell you like, hey, here's why I think there is God, right? And putting it in the kind of terms that I think the Neoplatonists put it in. So the basic reason is because what I use the term God to name is the reason why reality makes sense, or another way to put that might be, I use the term God to name the reason why reality is the way that it is. And so, since that's what I call God, and I think there is a reason why reality is the way that it is, or why reality makes sense, I think God exists, right? Like that's what I mean by the statement when I say God exists. That's what I basically mean by it. Of course, right, there's more, we could have a discussion about what exactly is that reason why, what else can we say about it? But that's essentially what God's existence, just as such, means in the Neoplatonic context.
So just to clarify, that would seem to entail that God was outside of reality.
Yes, that's correct. And that's why the Neoplatonists say that God is beyond being. So they're picking up on a statement in Plato's Republic where Plato says the good is beyond being, and they take that statement and sort of run with it and say, yeah, God is beyond being. And so really, when we say God exists, like in a way, yes, God exists. In another way, we have to say God doesn't exist because God is outside of reality or beyond reality. That is correct. That's how it has to be if you're trying to name the reason why reality is the way that it is with the term God.
Yeah, it seems really confusing to me because I define reality as all things that exist, all real things, as opposed to imaginary things which do not exist. And so to be outside of reality would mean to not exist. And so if we're asking why is reality the way it is, I would say that there, even if you wanted to say that God was outside of reality, that God would still, you'd have to have you could ask the same question about God in that context too. Why is God the way God is? And it seems necessarily that the answer is going to fall back on one of the three Agrippa's trilemma: foundationalism, infinite regress, or circular reasoning. And so I don't understand what the benefit here is to say that God is outside of reality, or why that would make sense. It seems like it just confuses the topic because it's saying that, oh, he's outside of existence. Wait a minute. What? How can something outside of existence determine existence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is good because I think what's might be going on here is right, when we're looking at the Neoplatonists and the ancient Greek philosophy in general, all the terms they're using are like used in different ways, right? They're writing in Greek and Latin in some cases, and so they're used in different ways that we typically use them. So by reality or existence, what the Neoplatonists mean by that is intelligibility, meaning anything that can be understood in any way is real in some way. And so there's no distinction then. There is a distinction, you could say, between things that are real in the world that we perceive and then things in our imagination, but both are existing because they're basically using existence in the widest possible sense. Anything that I can speak about or think about or talk about or imagine or anything at all exists in some basic sense. And that's what reality is anything that exists in any sense. And then, yeah, sure, within that, we can make a distinction between, hey, there's some things that are out there in the world we perceive. There are other things that we just sort of imagine and create with our minds. And then there might be other sort of metaphysical realities that are neither. But yeah, that's what reality means here. And so when we say God is beyond reality, what they mean is that God is beyond anything that can be understood or anything intelligible. But then since whatever God is, right, manifests itself in reality, right, like it's what ultimately explains why reality is the way that it is. So in that way, we could sort of say, well, reality is kind of like God, and since reality is real and intelligible, we can say in a way that, yeah, God's real and intelligible because reality is like God, because God's the source of it. And so that's sort of what they're thinking. They're saying, like, why does reality make sense? Why is anything intelligible? There's got to be an answer to that. And so, like, we don't know what the answer is. We can never know what the answer is. Like, we can never understand what it is, but we have to be able to name it. And one of the names they use for it is God.
So why call it God? Why not say that reality explains itself? Just the nature of reality is the explanation of reality. Why add this extra variable that seems to fall back on the same necessary answer? Why is God the way God is? Well, because it is or something. And so it seems like we're adding an extra variable here for no reason.
Yeah, so this is probably, I don't know if this is the best way to go in this conversation, but yeah, one clarification about this, like, why, it seems like, yeah, we're adding an extra variable, and then we're going to have to ask, why is God the way God is? But the Neoplatonic system is set up so you don't actually have to do that, because the sort of principle, if you want to call it that, is that for any being, any reality, we have to ask why it is the way that it is, right? That's what rationality demands, that we ask that, and there's got to be an answer. But with God, it's not a being, not a thing. It's sort of a reason why, but it's not there. It isn't in any way either, right? So they're claiming God doesn't have properties. God doesn't exist in this way or that way, because properties and existing in one way or another way would actually limit God, and God is unlimited or infinite. And so it doesn't actually make sense to ask, why is God the way God is? Because God isn't in any way. That's the position. Like, you couldn't, if we're really going to follow this logic of, we really are committed to reason. And so at being committed to reason, we think that, like, for any object, any being, any state of affairs, we can ask why it is the way that it is. There's got to be some answer. Eventually, we're going to have to come up to something in quotation marks, because it's not really a thing, that's not a thing and is not a state of affairs, it is not a being. And so it doesn't actually make sense to ask why God or the one is the way that it is. We're sort of pushing to the limit here, where we reach sort of the limits of reason, and then recognize that, what constitutes these limits itself? We don't know, right? We can't say anything about it, really. We don't know what it is, but we still need to talk about it, because we're coming to the limitations of like why anything is anything. So again, they're all for that, right? They grant all of this. They say beyond being, it's not a being, it's not a thing. Any name we give it, we really have to take back. And so it's strange, we can't give like some sort of normal account of the one, like we could of any other thing, or of God that we could of any other thing. But yeah, we're not like adding an extra entity or an extra variable. We're just naming the limit of what rationality can do, that which limits, like, hey, here's what makes sense, and what is beyond that, and what makes that possible. We're going to name that. One of the names they give to it is God. They give a bunch of other names as well.
Well, so my position is, why not give it the name of nothing? It doesn't exist. There is no such thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that is one of the names they give of it, right? So yeah, you could give the name nothing, because you're saying it's beyond being, and yeah, they say like it's not being, which is to say it's nothing, and that's fine too, right? That is one of the names that they give of it. So particularly why they give the name God to it, since, I mean, it seems like this is the kind of question you're driving at here, which, yeah, maybe you would say, I would not give the name God to that, because that'd be confusing. And I agree, if we're speaking contemporary English, you could at least make the argument that it's confusing to call this God. But at their time, this is not that strange, because this is sort of how the word God is used. So, I mean, I've got a quote from Boethius here, who says that whatever it is by which things remain in being and are changed, right? So why reality is the way that it is, I call God the conventional term that everyone uses, right? So he's just going like, look, whatever that is, whatever this is, that's the ultimate explanation for everything, that's just what people call God. And at their time, right, I mean, they're living in a world here where there's still paganism, right? This is not like a world, like the one we live in, where, it's dominated by, late forms of Protestant Christianity. Rather in their world, like, you're dominated by paganism. So people, think about God in a lot of different ways, and the sort of basic idea of what God is in that world is God is whatever is fundamental. It's the gods or the immortals, right? So whatever is fundamental, that's what they call God. just like in Hindu philosophy as well, where Prakriti, the term that you could translate as God in Sanskrit, you could also translate that as fundamental nature of reality, and I'm fine with that, right? Like, you want to call it the fundamental nature of reality? I call it that too. When I teach medieval philosophy, I'm like, this is what they're calling God. You could just think of it as the fundamental nature of reality.
Well, so that part I agree with. The fundamental nature of reality makes sense, but then when you say it's beyond reality or explains reality or is the reason why reality is the way that it is, well, that seems to be like now it's not just the fundamental nature of reality, it's that plus something that doesn't exist. And so it seems like there's two separate claims being made there. One is that there's a fundamental nature of reality, which I agree with. That part I can get on board with. But then there's this other claim that it's beyond reality. And that part I don't think makes sense. And so I think that if we're comparing worldviews, essentially, why would it be more rational to say that the fundamental nature of reality is outside of reality, and that there must be this semi-existing thing that governs reality outside of reality, and not just label that category of outside of reality as non-existent things, and the fundamental nature of reality is just a part of reality itself?
Yeah, okay, good. So you mentioned, like, we're comparing worldviews, and I don't know if I would characterize it. Yeah, I don't think the Neoplatonists would really characterize it that way, what we're doing, but maybe we can come back to that later, because I think your basic question here is, why are we claiming that the fundamental nature of reality is outside reality? That seems like crazy. And yeah, like, I think that's a fair question to raise. And so, like, let's try to tackle that first. So this is where you're getting kind of the Platonism of it, right? Where the nature of something, in a way, can't be identified completely with the thing. So if you and I have human nature, well, human nature isn't just you, right? It isn't just me. It isn't just any human, actually. It's intelligible. Even if all humans go extinct, it's intelligible, meaning you could understand it still, or someone could understand it still, or it could be understood in principle still. And so in that sense, like, human nature is, meaning is intelligible, independent of any particular humans. Just like Tyrannosaurus Rex nature is intelligible, even if there are no Tyrannosaurus Rexes, right? We can still understand what they were. And since anything we can understand is or exists in some sense, yeah, that's the idea of, like, if we're going to have a nature exists, but it doesn't exist in the same sense that the particular things that have that nature exist. And so if we're talking about reality has got to be one thing, and it has its nature. It has the nature of reality. But the nature of reality isn't reality, right? They just aren't the same thing. They don't exist in the same way. Reality is a particular thing, in a sense, where the nature of reality is not. It's a nature. And so yeah, this just comes from just the name fundamental nature of reality, means the nature has to be beyond reality, in a sense, or it has to be real in a different sense than reality itself is real. Just like human nature has to be real in a different sense than you or I or any other particular human is real.
So the claim would be something like, if you grant that there are these abstract natures that exist in some realm outside of the physical world, and these are existing objects that describe things in the world, and they are required if you can describe things in the world, then whatever reality is as the whole must also have one of these nature thingies. And so that would be the most primal thing, presumably, is the nature of reality. But then it seems like we could make the same argument for natures themselves, that there must be a nature of a nature. And so there must be some composite, even more abstract thing to natures. And the nature of reality must itself have some kind of a composite nature. And so that thing would be even more fundamental. So it seems like the argument of implying that there must be some abstract descriptor of things in the world that must exist, well, those would also necessarily have some kind of abstract descriptor, I think. And so the Platonistic argument would lead to some kind of an infinite regress of abstract natures of abstract natures.
Yeah, good. So this problem, right, like third man regress is kind of what it's called in the secondary literature, I guess. And as early as Aristotle calls it that. And yeah, this is a sort of famous problem with Platonism. It's brought up in Plato's dialogue. So Plato introduces this problem himself in the dialogue of Parmenides, and then after that is like, yeah, but still forms have to be real, and then goes in this long, like crazy thing in the second half of the Parmenides where you read it and you're just like, I understand all the words, but he's just saying like one is not, and like all this stuff. But if you work through dialogues like the Parmenides or the Sophists, which I primarily work on, a sort of ontology gets developed here. It's you've got to kind of pull it out, right? You've got to, like a Platonic dialogue, he's not just giving it to you. You have to interpret what the dialogue ultimately means. But yeah, so these objections, a good objection. It's an objection Plato himself raises about form. So to answer it, I guess first step is kind of like I mentioned at the beginning. Contemporary analytic philosophy, people call Platonism like abstract objects exist, but I don't think that's a good way to characterize Platonism. So forms are not abstract objects, because Plato doesn't call them that, so why are we calling them that? And then natures aren't really fully identified with forms either, at least in the advanced dialogues like the Parmenides and the Sophist. I mean, you can use the term and form to talk about a nature, but a nature is like this strange thing because a nature is not an actual object. It's rather, it's like a power, or an ability or capacity that an object has. And so it's not like I'm saying human nature is some like other existing thing that's out in heaven or something. No, that's explicitly denied in Platonic dialogues. Forms are not anywhere. Natures are not anywhere. You just can't make spatial predications of them. And so they aren't in some separate realm, but they still just aren't identified with the things that have them. I mean, the way we speak, I say I have human nature. I don't say I am human nature. And it's crazy to say I am human nature. But I'm not claiming, Plato doesn't claim that natures of things are somehow in some different realm, because that would treat a nature as if it was like an actual physical object that could exist in space, where it can't. A nature is something you can understand, you can talk about it, you can say it is certain things, and in that sense it is or exists in some way, but it doesn't exist as an object that would be in some location. That's just not the kind of existence natures have. Natures aren't in locations.
So it seems like
that's like, I don't accept this like forms are in some other realm kind of talk, because that's, you do get Socrates talking like that kind of in the Republic, but the Republic is a super like metaphorical context where Socrates explicitly says, hey, I'm going to give you these images, and we could go in a longer way and give you a more sophisticated account, but we're not going to do that. I'm just going to talk in images. There's the good, it's like the sun, and all that's great and super helpful. But I think, ultimately in these later dialogues, Plato goes beyond that and says like, okay, let's actually work this out rigorously. We can't be sort of imagining that natures are some like objects that could be in this room, but hey, they're not in this room. They're actually in heaven somewhere. That's just not. No, we can talk about natures. We can say true things about them. They exist in that way. But one true thing you can't say about them is that they're in some location, because they're just not in any location.
Jacob, thank you for the super chat. It says pain and suffering is the fundamental nature of reality. For those who follow the jump will find comfort in the chair. Relaxations 14.9. But so it seems like for any set, if you take any set of things, whether you call them objects or foundations or natures or whatever, you can find some reason to say that this set of things can be described by a different set of things. And it seems like that's what Platonism is doing with reality and physical things. They're saying, well, physical things that exist have some nature, and this nature isn't a physical thing, therefore it must be a different set that predates the physical set. And I don't see any reason why I can't just put those things in a set and say it must be predated by some other physical set that doesn't have some kind of relation between the natures. I don't see why just sticking with the physical world and adopting Platonic objects for any reason would be a better approach than just simply saying just the physical world or something along those lines.
Yeah, so is the objection here that we're like multiplying entities, or like, there's no, I don't know like how set theory like applies to this. So, right, like I don't care about any of the set language, and Plato doesn't talk about that. So yeah, I see no reason to think that if I get to something that I'm like, this is the reason why, and I'm willing to grant like it's not a thing, And so it's not an object and it doesn't belong in any sets. If I'm willing to grant all that, I don't see why I'm therefore required to then posit some other higher level thing, right? If I'm, the infinite regress is because people are trying to like not grant what, me or Plato or whoever is saying, right? Because I'm saying natures are not things. They do not belong in sets. And so they do not require a further explanation beyond themselves.
Well, because it seems like you're saying only things are allowed to be placed into sets or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's right.
But why? It seems like a special pleading in a way to say, well, then the non-things cannot be put into a set, but the non-things is a set of non-things.
Yeah, it's because only something that I can identify as one object could be an object in a set, it seems like. And I mean, isn't that right? Like if I can't even make the predicate one of it, then how can I put it in a set?
Well,
right?
things
So
that
I'm
are
saying like natures are not even like, you can't even, strictly speaking, you can't even predicate one or many of them.
I'm not sure what you
right?
mean.
So
It's like
talk about
if I
them
said
or a, like that's not like, that's as best as we can do when speaking about them, but they actually, that's not strictly speaking true, because a nature is what explains why something is what it is. And so we actually need natures already there in some sense in order to explain how an object gets the property of being one or being many or being. And so if I can't, right, the nature of one can't itself be one thing. And yeah, I take it that would strictly speaking apply to like any nature as well. So that's why they can't be like objects in a set, because they aren't numerable, strictly speaking.
Well, so like the example that comes to mind are the set of logical contradictions: a round square, a married bachelor, the longest stick, a two-ended stick. These things are in a set. They don't exist. They're not existing things. They can't even be imagined. They're logical contradictions, but they still exist in a set because sets aren't really limited to natures or things. It's just anything we can categorize conceptually in any way. It's a set, and so it seems to me.
I guess in the Platonist view, they would exist still, because again, anything you can talk about exists. So if we can talk about logical contradictions and square circles, they exist in some sense. But yeah, to put them, I guess I agree, like a square circle could exist in a set, in a sense, right? Because it's somewhat of an intelligible object. But
why are natures different?
Circle can't, because either it doesn't have a nature, or if it does, which yeah, I would tend to say like there is no such thing as the nature of a square circle at all. You can't even talk about it. Therefore, it doesn't exist in a set.
Wait, why is that? Why is the nature of a square circle different than the nature of a square?
Because the square circle, so I do grant that the square circle is an intelligible object, which we can sort of say like it's something we can talk about. So it's like minimally intelligible. But it doesn't have one nature, or we aren't even like speaking as if it has one nature. What we're doing is we're taking two objects with two objects that we're numerating because there's we make a distinction between their natures, and then we're speaking as if those objects are the same object. And so there's not like a nature of square circle. There's a nature of square, there's a nature of circle, that's fine. But then we're just, when we talk, we're like acting like we can just say that those natures are the same. Or some combination of them is the same. And that's not true. Like you can't, that's just a false claim. It doesn't make any sense.
So couldn't I say the same thing about natures themselves? The use of the category nature is taking a bunch of things like particles or whatever, and saying these particles combined into the shape of a chair make it the nature of a chair or something. But really doesn't make any sense. There's no nature of a chair. It's just something we made up. And so couldn't we be taking these concepts of saying that something has a nature, and it would be the same as saying that a round square has a nature, in that it's combining an arbitrary set of things that have no connection whatsoever, and then compiling them into a concept that we've labeled the nature of the thing. And that makes as equally as little sense as to say there is a nature of a round square. Why would that be different?
Yeah, so it's because so some Platonists grant that like we make up the nature of chair. Okay, so whatever, like I'm willing to grant that for the sake of this discussion. I think in a sense we do, in a sense we don't. But But yeah, let's say we do. Why a nature of a chair is different from the nature of a square circle is because the nature of a chair is actually it's intelligible in a different way than the nature of a square circle is. So the nature of a square circle is actually not intelligible. I can't understand what that is. Like, it's impossible. And in that sense, there is no nature of a square circle. There's natures of squares because I can understand squares, I can understand circles. I can also understand what chairs are, right? I can define them, understand them. Yes, humans create them. That's obviously true. But I actually understand them as an artifact that humans create so that humans can sit on. And so because it's intelligible, and that's what it means for something to be or to exist, again, in this wide sense where everything we can think about or talk about exists in some sense, right? Chair does not exist in the same sense. Its being is greater than the being of, or more full or more complete than the being of a square circle is, because the being of a square circle is like barely intelligible. To even talk about the object is basically impossible. To actually understand what it is really impossible. And that's why it doesn't have a nature. Where a chair, I can understand what a chair is. Yes, chairs are things people make, but fully intelligible. And they're not just particles either, right? Because I could understand what a chair is without understanding anything about particles. And so the intelligibility or nature of a chair does not require me to understand particles. Particles have a different nature and a different intelligibility.
So the way I see it is like, if I take a language like English or whatever, I can combine the words in many incoherent ways, like colorless green dreams sleep nervously, something like it doesn't make any sense. And then I can combine the words in a way that they do make sense. I am 6'2", whatever. And it doesn't seem like the words in being in a coherent order versus an incoherent order would entail the existence of the object simply because the laws of English are being followed in such a way that the sentence makes sense. And it seems like intelligibility follows the same kind of logic here, where even if something is intelligible because it follows the order of our brains, it makes sense in our brains. The fact that something doesn't make sense to our brains doesn't seem to have any less primacy than the things that do make sense to our brains. And so why say that the fact that it is intelligible or coherent entails that it has this extra ontological quality of nature to it? It seems like there would be no more reason to think that the things that are intelligible to us have a nature than the things that are unintelligible to us have a nature, and that our ability to have something be intelligible is no more indicative of something else in reality than the ability of English to be formed in sentences under the rules of English has any more entailment to that there being something in reality.
Yeah, okay. So I agree with you that, yeah, there's we can form sentences in different ways, and some ways follow the rules of English, some don't. And the ones that don't, you could be like a gibberish sentence that just, I don't actually know what you're saying when you say it. And then other times, yeah, you can put words together in a way that does follow the rules of grammar and the norms of English, and now it does make sense. So okay, so we agree on the like linguistic feel or plane here, right? So now we need to move to like, but what about the things we're talking about? So if I say something like, look, I'm going to use the term square to mean what most people call a tree, and then I'm going to use the term circularity to mean what most people call leaves, and then I'm going to tell you a square has circularity. Now that's actually fine, because once I've like clarified my terms, like you understand what I mean. What I mean is what most people would just say, like a tree has leaves, right? No problem there. So yeah, with language, as long as we just use the words however we want to use them, and as long as we're defining our terms, we can use them how we want. But of course, what I'm trying to sort of get at here with intelligibility is there's what the language is like referring to, though, is going to be intelligible or not, right? So when language refers to what we normally call trees having leaves, like that makes sense. I can actually understand what you're saying. Where when language refers to what we would normally call a square circle, that's maybe not even a way of saying it, right? When we're putting together, we're saying like, look, I mean the word square in the way that everyone else means it, and I mean the word circle, and then I'm saying there just are square circles. then I just can't understand what's actually being said. It's like if someone said, hey, I'm using, words like we normally use them in everyday life, and I'm telling you that it is true that 2 + 2 = 5. And that's the kind of thing where I'm like, I don't even understand what you're saying. Like, I literally can't understand it. I'm not saying it's false even. I'm just saying, like, I don't understand what you're saying. We need to clarify, are you really using these terms in the way that most people use them? And so 2 + 2 = 5, if we're using those words like people normally use them, that is unintelligible in the same way that square circle is. It has nothing to do with like how we put words together in English exactly, because again, I don't care if people want to change the meaning of words as long as they're clear that they're doing that.
Right. Just to clarify, I'm not disagreeing with that point. I'm saying,
Okay.
why do we care about intelligibility or think it has any more impetus on there being extra things than we do English? So why don't we treat intelligibility the same way we treat languages like English? They're just a thing we've made up. That's it. It's just a thing we've made up. And they don't have any, like, we wouldn't say that the English sentence, the sky is blue, indicates the property of Englishness to the sentence. The sentence entails a new property in reality. Like, no, we just made up the sentence. It's just, there's no extra property there. But in the way you're using natures, it seems like the ability for something to be intelligible entails this new property in reality of some kind of the naturedness of the object. So the fact that we can imagine it means that there's this extra thing there, which is its nature beyond just our ability to imagine it. Whereas if we, like in English, we don't say that. We don't say that because it is a coherent English sentence, therefore there is the Englishness somewhere behind the sentence or whatever. The sentence has the property of Englishness. We wouldn't say that. And so why would we think that the fact that something is intelligible would entail this extra property of natureness to it? Whereas obviously you don't think that of things that are unintelligible, square circles or whatever, which seems arbitrary. Like, we wouldn't say the English sentence, the sky is blue, has this extra property, but the English sentence, colorless green dream sleep fervently, does. We don't make that distinction. We think they have all of the same ontological properties as one another. And so why think there's this extra ontological property of intelligible things versus non-intelligible things?
Yes, I think we do actually do this with English, but let me try to, before we go back to that, let me see if I could just sort of try to directly address what you're getting at. So it's not like an extra property. It's just like, if I can understand something, it must be intelligible, because intelligible just means what can be understood. So it's not like I'm like adding some random extra property. It's just like, no, it's just like, if I'm saying that I understand it, then I'm already saying it's intelligible. Like, there's not, I guess in a sense, maybe in a sense you're like, no, it's saying I can understand something. We are adding something. We say it can be understood. Well, yeah, I guess in a way, but I don't see like, what's the problem, right? Like, if I can understand something that it can be understood, intelligibility means can be understood. I don't get what's the problem with adding that property to literally everything I can think about or talk about.
Well, so that part I'm okay with, but it's the next part of, I can understand the concept of nature having a cause or an explanation or something. Therefore, it has a cause or an explanation or something, a nature to some degree. The fact that you can explain it doesn't entail that it has any causal relation to anything in reality. Like, I can understand that there is a leprechaun that caused my cup to fall over. It didn't. I knocked it over, so it wasn't a leprechaun. But I can coherently understand the idea of a leprechaun knocking over my cup. And so the same thing could apply to reality. I can form the concept of something determining the nature of reality and say there is no such thing, it does not exist. What determined reality was its own nature, purely physical, just quantum fields, nothing else whatsoever. And even though I can conceptually, intelligibly understand that there could be some other abstract object that may or may not be able to do this, which honestly I think that would be more of a contradiction. But even if I could, that doesn't entail that it exists.
Yeah, so it seems like you're using the term exists here, like, and maybe this is what you're doing, right? You're not granting the like concept of existence that Neoplatonists are using, which is this wide concept where everything you can talk about exists. Because I would completely agree with you if by exist you mean things that are present in the physical world that we perceive, which is where the leprechaun comes in, right? Why don't I think a leprechaun, made my bed this morning? Because I just have like no, reason to think, no one perceived a leprechaun walk into my room. No one ever has perceived one. Right. So when I'm asking about like things that exist as objects present in the world that we perceive, that's going to be based on like what perceptions are people having. But that's not like existence. That's just like a certain kind of existence. That's existence of something in the world that we perceive. It's not like, I don't call that reality. I call that like a domain of reality. But yeah, the Neoplatonists are saying like that's just one domain of reality. There's reality is anything though that you can conceive or can talk about at all. So leprechauns, they are real in some sense. Now, yeah, you'd be crazy if you think like they made your bed this morning. If by your bed you mean the bed here that you're perceiving. But you can say true things about leprechauns, I guess, in stories. And so leprechauns
yeah.
are
So that's a great
In
example.
that sense.
Well, that's a great example. So like when we say the reason reality is the way it is, would to me be like saying the reason the bed is the way it is. Now, obviously, if you say the leprechaun is the reason the bed the way it is, as you said, that doesn't make any sense. Like, no, I did the bed. The leprechaun didn't do the bed. And so we could say the same thing about the universe or reality. Say, why is reality the way it is? It's not because of the leprechaun or the nature or whatever of this new conceptual framework is. We can say it's because of the physical properties of the bed. That's or the physical properties of reality. That's the reason. There's no subsequent pre-existing nature-y reason. Just like there's no leprechaun. It seems like those are analogous kinds of a claim. And so even though it is intelligible to speak of the leprechaun or to speak of some abstract object that caused reality, it doesn't seem that it's necessarily the case if we're talking about the reality as in all the things that exist. It could just be a quantum field or something. So what is it seems like the Neoplatonists are bridging that gap that you just described of conflating the object of reality with being causally related to some kind of an abstract object, just like the object of your bed is causally related to the leprechaun.
Yeah, so I think what you're calling physical properties or properties in general is what I'm calling a nature. So if we want to say reality is what it is because of its properties, that's like saying reality is what it is because of its natures. And that's what I'm saying, right? And the natures or nature, since they're actually not numerable, that's what we're calling God or gods or the divine or whatever you want to call it. If you don't want to use those terms, like that's fine, right? I'm not having an argument about words here. Yep. We could have that argument, but that's not what we're like talking about right now. And so yeah, what you're calling property, I'm calling natures. So and then I'm adding more. I'm saying like, if you really think about what a property is, it's kind of a weird thing that actually can't be numbered except by reference to something that possesses it. And so something that's not identical to it. Right. And so, yeah,
that's the part I think I would disagree with.
Same idea as far as I can tell.
Well, I think that's the part I disagree with, because I think when I think of the fundamental nature of reality, I think quantum field. It is this particular physical object. This is it. There is nothing prior to that. There's nothing outside of that. It's this exact physical object. Its nature is identical with itself. There is no abstractions to it whatsoever. It is purely a physical object. And
what do you mean by physical? Yeah. I mean, so because maybe we're like, okay, you're just saying, instead of, I call fundamental nature of reality God, you call it quantum field. So yeah, do we actually disagree here? I don't know. Because yeah, if we get clear on like, why do you call it physical? Like the quantum field, why do you call it physical? Because you can study it by physics. Is that sort of how it's getting that name, or?
Made of matter and energy.
But then wouldn't the matter energy be the fundamental thing, not the field? Like, which is fundamental, the field or the stuff it's made out
of? Well, I think so. Energy is obviously what makes everything. Energy is just a classification that we use interactions with. And so in that way, I guess energy, because I think quantum fields and energy are synonymous in this case. So they're not made of anything other than themselves. They are themselves.
Okay. Yeah. So it's so yeah, I don't know why we're calling it physical other than because you can study it by physics. But yeah, if it's something that's not anything but itself, it doesn't even have properties beyond itself, like strictly speaking, right? Even if we need to talk that way sometimes, then aren't you basically saying the same thing as the Neoplatonists or yeah, I mean, maybe you're not. So, I mean, I want to see why you're not. Because you're sort of saying, what the ultimate nature of reality is, we can't really know what that is. We can talk about it in terms of its effects, like, through the effects that we observe in the world and so on. But it's ultimately just like the singular, not even thing, because why can we even give properties like one or many to it? Right? I mean, I don't see why we would denumerate the quantum field as one, because something can only be one if it's like countable among other things in a class. But the quantum field is not countable, at least as you're using the term, doesn't seem like it's quantable among other things in a class.
Well, there's different kinds of quantum fields. So I think of like a quantum field as like a string. It's like it's a string and all of the other things are made of the string, but it's still a thing. It's a single thing that exists right there. It's the string.
Yeah, and so I guess when I say something is one or single, I mean, yeah, maybe there's like maybe this will help like clarify, because in normal usage, when I call something one, like I've got, like, I don't know, like I have one pen here, right? It's because I can put it I can sort of group it together with other things that have the same nature or property, penness, right? Whatever you want to call it. And so for an object to, strictly speaking, be countable as one thing, we have to understand it as possessing some nature that's different than it, right? So I can count this as one pen because it's not just penness. It's one pen. Okay, so if the quantum field is the fundamental nature of reality, then it seems like there is no like other that we can count it together with, right? We can't say, well, there were other realities that it was, could be other possible realities were there, because possibility would be more fundamental if there are other possible quantum fields. And so if it's really going to be fundamental, I don't see, like, you only mean it's one in the sense that it's like the only fundamental nature of reality, the one unique only. And that's precisely the sense in which the Neoplatonists mean that God is the one unique only. It doesn't mean that God is like one thing and there are other possible gods, and that's why God doesn't require an explanation, because it's not one in the sense of a particular. It's only one in the sense of like a unique, intelligible.
Well, so there's a part I think I would disagree with, because I think, yes, there are definitely, there's multiple quantum fields. There isn't just one. But I also think that there are possibilities of things, of realities without quantum fields. I don't think there's any problem with that.
So why aren't possibilities more fundamental on your sense then? Because it seems to me that possibilities, they're things we can talk about, so they're real in the sense that I'm using the term real. And if I'm saying that, the quantum field that we exist in, or whatever, however you want to talk about it, is like one possible ones, then the possibility is more fundamental, because it's,
well, that would go back to
possibility is like actually more fundamental than the actual in that way. Or how is it not? Like, I don't, yeah.
Well, possibility would be, well, possibility would be essentially analogous to the leprechaun here. Like, obviously, if the leprechaun caused the bed, it would be more fundamental. And I can imagine it causing the bed, but it just didn't. And so the fact that there are other possibilities doesn't mean those possibilities exist as a more fundamental object. It just means they're things that we can conceptualize, and the conceptual ability doesn't mean that it has any causal relation to the bed. So the same thing would apply to the quantum fields. Even though I can imagine something quantum making the quantum fields, or other quantum fields, or universes without a quantum fields, doesn't mean there's any causal relation between those possibilities and reality. It could just be that reality is just the quantum field and there is no other things, even though other things are possible. And so I would say that this other class of possibility is like the leprechaun. It's something we can imagine, something that is intelligible, but whether or not intelligibility or rational or conceptual ability have anything to do with existence is not something I see as any more obvious than whether or not the leprechaun actually caused the bed.
Okay, let me try to because again, I think this might actually be like an issue of what you said at the end there is, like, how does what we can understand like relate to existence? Is that kind of the fundamental
I think
feel
so.
like that's sort of like fundamental issue here. Okay. Because yeah, maybe that's the way to go here. So yeah, the reason why I think that, and I take it why the Neoplatonists think that, is because I can only talk about, conceptualize things that are intelligible. And so if I'm trying to say, hey, there's some reality out there that is unintelligible, what am I talking? Like, I'm literally not talking about that because I'm only talking about things that are intelligible. And so yeah, I think that's kind of the issue is like, it's impossible to say the sentence and have it make sense, meaning have it be something that you can understand and I can understand. Like there could be realities or existing things or existences that aren't intelligible. I think that sentence is like saying 2 + 2 is 5. I just don't understand. It like involves a performative contradiction because you can't talk about something that you don't understand. And so I don't think we can even talk about realities that are unintelligible. And so that's why I have this like very close relationship between reality or being and intelligibility, because there is nothing that you can talk about. There is no reality. We can't meaningfully speak about a reality that is unintelligible. And
right. So I agree with that
literally
part.
never talking about that, and neither is anyone else, as far as I can tell.
Well, so I agree with that part, but
Okay.
the opposite seems to be also true. There are things that that are intelligible that are not in reality. So the fact that something is intelligible is like what is it? Necessary and sufficient conditions. The all flowers are roses, or all roses are flowers, not all flowers are roses, kind of a thing. And so the fact that something is intelligible is useful. It means it could be in reality, but it doesn't mean it is in reality. And so just like nothing that is unintelligible could exist in reality, like a round square, presumably, it doesn't also follow that everything that is intelligible does exist in reality. And so I can say that leprechauns making the bed don't exist. There is no causal relationship. There's no causal leprechaun that causally made the bed. That does not exist at all. And so the same thing could apply to other concepts, like the concept of natureness. Natureness could be like the leprechaun, and it doesn't exist in reality. It's conceptual, which is fine, can grant that. And so it could exist in reality, but it doesn't entail that it does exist in reality.
Okay, good. So yeah, so we're fundamentally here, seems like disagreeing about what reality is, which is good. I mean, this is what I would expect. And I mean, yeah, these are the sort of like issues I like to think about. So yeah, I've given you what I mean by the term reality, which is just anything intelligible. It seems like you're actually using the term in a more restricted way. And so what do you mean by it, right? It's like because you say there's intelligible things that aren't real, where I'm just trying to say like, I just mean reality in the widest sense. Yes, we can make distinctions between different kinds of realities and things are real in different ways. Totally fine with that. But yeah, I think you seem to be wanting to use real in a more restricted sense. And so, yeah, what is that?
So I think specifically, I mean, it has a causal relation to the other things that we interact with in the world, as far as we can tell. So like caused the nature of reality, or because you used the phrase that God is that which causes reality to be the way it is, or something along those lines. So when I use real here, I'm using it in the scientific sense of having a causal relation in something in reality. So it has to have a causal relation to be real. And I don't think abstract objects do. So I think that the leprechaun has no causal relation to the bed. Therefore, it is not real.
Yeah.
And
Okay. So let me put this back to you in my language just to make sure we're like understanding. So what you mean by real is something that would be like an entity that we could talk about causing things in empirical science, like in a empirical scientific inquiry.
Yes, sort of. I think even if we couldn't verify it, if it did cause something that in the same world we're talking about as science, then yes, that would be real, even if we couldn't verify it.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think that God is an object within science, like empirically scientific inquiry, because God's not an object in the physical world. And if you also mean by cause, like one object in the physical world causes another one, like a leprechaun causes the bed, or I cause the bed when I make it. God is not a cause in that sense, right? We have to
okay, so just to clarify, what do you mean when you say God is the reason why reality is the way it is? Because that sounds like a causal relation. There's a causal relation between God and reality's nature being a particular way.
Yeah, I agree. There is a causal relation in some sense. It's just not in like a scientific sense. yeah, what I mean by God is the reason why is that if I'm asking why does everything make sense, or why is everything, when I mean everything in my sense of everything, right? Every intelligible thing that's intelligible in any way, why is it the way that it is? Why does it make sense? The answer to that question is what I'm naming God. And again, you don't have to name it that if you don't want to, right? We can talk about why I'm naming that, but yeah, that's what I mean by reason why. I don't mean like a thing that's, taking some pre-existing material and organizing it into the world we have, because there is no pre-existing material. I just mean like whatever answers the question why, in the same sense in which I go like, why am I the way I am? Because I have human nature, right? Because I'm a human. That's why, right? There's a like structure that my body has and my biological life has because of human nature. And that's not incompatible with scientific accounts because they're like tracking different kinds of causes. So yeah, what I mean by reason why is just the everyday sense of like, I guess, yeah, like why is whatever this a screen? Because it has the property of being a screen. Why is that a tree? Because it has the property of being a tree, or has the nature of tree, if you want to use it that way. So that's what I mean by reason why. It does not cause in some kind of physical scientific sense, because then it would have to be an object that's a physical scientific object, and that's not going to work if we think that God is the source of reality. It can't be like an object in it.
Yeah, so in my worldview, there's causal closure from physical interactions. And so there is, the final cause is going to be a physical interaction between the quantum field and energy or something. And so if you say, why is the quantum field a quantum field? Because it has a nature of being a quantum field or something. That part doesn't, there seems to be no causal relation there. That seems to be a label that we put on things, like why is I don't know, why is Call of Duty the worst video game ever? It's because we put a label on it, not because it has some property there of worstness. It's just because we labeled it that way. And so I think that the fact that we can label things doesn't entail an answer to the why question. It seems like you're saying that the answer to the question why is itself the fundamental nature or something along those lines. But I don't see why that would be the case. Why would it be the case that our ability to make up an answer to the why question makes it true or makes it real in your sense of, or the having some kind of causal relation to the object itself?
Yeah, so again, I haven't said what the answer is, right? Because I have granted we don't know what the thing, or not thing, but yeah, the reason, we don't know what the reason is, and we can't know what the reason is because we're asking what makes anything make sense, and whatever's going to answer that can't be itself something that like makes sense. So yeah, like I'm trying to like think of like exactly what you're asking. So why do I think that I want to talk about there being a reason why reality is how it is? Because for any real thing, I think we can, ask that question and have it be a meaningful question. Why is it the way that it is? And if it's a meaningful question, that means in some sense, there's an answer to it. Like something is motivating the question in me. Something is making me want to raise that question. And the whatever it is making me want to raise that question, that's the thing that I'm calling God. You can call fundamental nature reality, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, like otherwise it's just like, I'm just not going to be a rational person. I'm just going to grant brute facts, which I don't see as like a rational position. Ultimately, it's sort of like saying, hey, reason like prompts me to ask these questions, but I'm just going to say they have no answers. Not because they really don't make sense, but because like, I just, whatever. Yeah. I guess I don't know why wouldn't I grant that something is prompting me to ask this question, right? Because I don't see like a problem with the question itself. Asking why reality has the property of reality or the nature of reality seems like a fine question, just like asking why a quantum field has the property of a quantum field. Seems like, yeah, that's a legitimate question. So why should I sort of say like, no, that question isn't a question because it doesn't have an answer.
Well, let me ask this way. Is it possible that there are things that are unintelligible for us, but could be intelligible with a brain upgrade or something?
No, because you can't talk about anything that's unintelligible. So I can't, like, saying that doesn't make any sense ultimately if you think about it, because if it was unintelligible for us, like completely unintelligible, like not intelligible in any sense or any way, then you're not even talking about it. So no, I don't grant that statement is meaningful. I'm not even, yeah, and it's not even like true or false. It's just like not even a meaningful proposition.
Because for me, I think of examples like Einstein, general relativity, where space and time bend. You know, that was his hypothesis.
Yeah, but
And
that's
the
fine. That's
philosophers,
totally conceptual.
well, no, at the time, the
Totally
philosophers were
acceptable.
like, that is gibberish. It is completely logically incoherent. We can't understand it whatsoever. Space is an abstract concept. It literally can't bend. Only physical objects can bend. They were proven wrong. So they were incapable of understanding the idea of space-time bending. They couldn't do it. With an upgrade of understanding of physics and of what things happen, like poof, okay, well, now we understand it. Now it's just commonplace in physics. So it seems to me that intelligibility is nothing more than human brains processing, nothing more, completely useless in reality. Nothing gives us no relevant information about reality whatsoever. And so the ability to intelligibly express something or understand something really doesn't matter. It doesn't have any causal relation whatsoever. It's just a byproduct of evolution. And so I don't see, for me, the answer to the question would be the opposite. I'd say that, is it possible that our current things that are unintelligible could be intelligible with a brain upgrade? Like, yes, obvious, anything. Round squares could be, if in some way unintelligible in a future brain state that we have higher levels of consciousness. Of course it could. And so for me, this idea of intelligibility having some kind of primacy over the nature of existing objects and concepts being the fundamental stage of those doesn't seem to make sense to me. To me, that's like, I don't get it. It just seems like saying English is the fundamental thing.
Yeah, so with the Einstein case, intelligibility, remember, just means what can be understood. So my claim is anyone ever with any kind of brain, like no matter what kind of being you are, can only understand things that can be understood. That's my claim. So Einstein's theory of relativity can be understood, and it always could be understood. It was always possible. It's just someone had to like actually work it out and say it clearly enough so that now people can understand it. So yeah, it just doesn't seem like a counterexample to me, because my claim is just anyone will only ever understand things that are intelligible, meaning things that can be understood. Period.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I would definitely agree there, but I could also say the same thing. Like, people will only say sentences that are sentences.
Yep.
Okay.
That's true too. Yeah.
But why think that because it can be understood, that makes it relevant to anything in reality outside of our just like, because you use reality to include all of the conceptual things as existing. Why not say those don't exist? Why not adopt the more like materialistic worldview that those are non-existing things? These concepts don't exist. Why would that not be a preferable methodology or preferable ideology?
So I guess I'm fine with that because yeah, it doesn't like change anything. So because I guess where I want to start with is like, when I say anything, what am I actually talking about? When I understand anything, what am I actually doing? Right. So I want to start there. That's why I start with this super wide concept of reality, where it's just anything that's intelligible in any way, meaning anything I can talk about or think about at all, or that anyone ever could talk about or think about at all, whatever that is, that's what reality is. So I want to start out with this wide sense, just because like that's where I start. I start by the fact that I'm talking, and then like, okay, what's going on here? And then yeah, once we do that, fine. Like if you want to, and I'm actually fine with this, because the word existence, that concept, I don't really like it. I like the concept of being. There's no word in ancient Greek, which is what I'm into, that really correlates with existence. So if you want to say like, look, by existence, let's just use the word existence to mean things that are objects in the world we perceive around us. I go like, okay, fine. If we want to designate that domain of reality as existence, that's fine. And then I claim God doesn't exist. No one ever thought God exists in that sense. And so like, yeah, that's totally fine. God is a being. God is real in this more basic sense. But yeah, God's not an existing thing out there in the world we perceive. And really the whole like classical theistic tradition doesn't say that. And so yeah, I mean, that's just fine, right? Like if we want to restrict the word existence that way, I have no problem with that. But then we're not going to say God exists. Instead, I'm going to say God is. And I can do that instead.
Well, so like, what about the idea that all concepts are purely a product of neurological firing in the brain due to evolution, and the concept of godness or the concept of dinosaurs are nothing more than a thing that arose from neurons, two sets of neurons in the brain firing together in the same neuroplastic chain to generate this concept, but there's nothing else outside of it.
Yeah, so the problem I have with this kind of view is that it seems like, and maybe you have an answer to this, but yeah, the question I always have for it is neurons are nothing but that then as well, and so neurons aren't real. So like it seems like the position is self-refuting. Because why are you granting neurons are real when really the concept of neuron only came out of evolution? And so the concept of evolution only came out of evolution. So like there's no reason to think that's real either.
Well, like neurons are a physical thing we can hold, kind of a thing. So I'd say that the physical thing that we can actually hold is obviously a real thing, but the concept that arises when they fire in a certain way, I would not say is a real kind of thing. So that would be the difference, I think.
But yeah, I don't understand what like things that we hold have properties, and the concept just tracks, either is the same thing or just tracks the property. And so if a neuron is something that we can hold, it has properties like being something we can hold, and therefore the property has to be real. And what's the difference between what I'm calling the property in the nature and what you're calling the concept?
I don't understand the question exactly. So like, I would say things that are real are things that exist independent of imagination. I say concepts do not exist independent of imaginations. Neurons do exist independent of imagination. The properties or the labels we use for the object would obviously exist in our imagination, but not outside of our imagination. So when we're referring to the object, its existence is this matter, energy, spin, whatever else, mass. And those concepts that we label only exist in our imagination. They're not real. But the things that in themselves do exist.
So does a neuron have the property of being a neuron, being part of a brain? Are those real properties neurons have, or are those just concepts we made up? Or are they both, right? It could be like, I make up concepts that correspond to real properties.
Well, so they're definitely concepts, and the concept part is just made up. And
okay.
There are facts in reality, but those are not concepts. And the facts in reality are not made up.
Are there properties in reality?
Properties. I think the way I use properties is like the word truth. Truth is a property of sentences. The sentence, the sky is blue, or the table is here, is true, but the table isn't true. There's no truth in the table. And so property.
Yeah, I guess, is a neuron a thing that's in a brain, right? Does it have
Yes.
the property of being a thing that's in the brain, or is that not how you would talk about it?
I wouldn't call that a property, but yes. So the neuron is in a brain. Yes, it's true.
So what would you call that? It's just like a fact?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay, so neurons. So why can't I reword that fact? So we got a fact. A neuron is in a brain.
Yeah.
When I say a neuron has a property, I'm just saying like a neuron has like, I'm just sort of saying that fact in a different way, right? So like all I mean by property is X, right? And so if a neuron is in a brain, then being in a brain is in a brain. Those are same thing, right? So yeah, and so I guess I'm saying what I'm calling properties, which are just like predicates, have to be intelligible. I only think they're real. Any predicate that's intelligible, I call real in the sense that it's intelligible. And I've granted things are real in different ways. So I grant like leprechauns are not real things that exist in the world we perceive, but they are real things. You know, it's fine to predicate leprechaunness of this like guy in this story who finds a gold thing at the end of a rainbow, right? Like say like, hey, this person in the story is a leprechaun, and this is a fictional story. Totally fine, no problem there. And so, yeah, so I still think we're back to. I don't see any difference between saying that like neurons have properties and saying like trees have properties and saying I have properties and saying reality has properties. Like what's all we're doing is like rewording factual statements using the word property. And so if we want, right, it's just like what I'm saying is that the fundamental nature of reality is there, or what I'm saying is there is an answer to why is everything the way that it is.
So like, what would be the difference between, what would be the difference? What would be the difference between God and a leprechaun?
So yeah, it's a different kind of intelligibility. So a leprechaun is not the answer because a leprechaun has like a certain specific nature to it that I can define and talk about in specific terms, right? It's a fictional creature that's kind of like a little dwarf sort of thing and wears green and all that. Right, so I can like tell you what a leprechaun is, loosely speaking. Where the answer to like why reality is the way that it is, whatever the answer to that is, like I can't actually comprehend what it is, just sort of definitionally, because if it's going to be the answer to why things are intelligible, it itself cannot be intelligible in the same sense, right? Its intelligibility has to be different. And so, yeah, it's not a leprechaun because I'm like, I don't add all these like leprechaun properties to it. In fact, I don't add any properties to it. God doesn't have properties. We can name it in different ways, but when we name it, we're not like talking about properties that it has. Yeah, and so that's basically how I distinguish those two. Leprechauns have properties. God doesn't. God just is the property of being, or being itself. It doesn't have properties.
I still don't see why that there would be such a thing. It still seems to me like an adding extra entities in the universe, even if it's a non-property entity of some kind, a being property of some kind.
Yeah, so why is it not just the same? I'm not adding anything. I'm just saying it's the nature of reality. So reality is a thing that has a nature. I'm not adding anything. It's just like if reality is real, then it has a nature. Because to say reality is real, to say it has the property is real, and to say it has the property of being real is just to say reality is. And if that statement is a factual statement, reality is, then the is, the being of reality, and reality itself, we can make a distinction there. And that's all I'm doing, right? I'm not adding new entities either, because an entity is like accountable objects, which I'm not saying that the nature of reality is a countable object. So I'm literally not adding an entity, because an entity is a being, where the thing I'm adding is not being added at all. It's just like the nature of the thing. And so I'm not adding an entity. It's just literally, and yeah, this is why the Neoplatonists talk this way, because they're sort of recognizing, yeah, if we add it as an entity, then this doesn't make any sense, right? That's why it can't be an entity. It's not a being. God is not a being.
Well, yeah, the way I see it is like a hierarchy thing. It's like concepts are like if we put a hierarchy of all existing things, you got quantum fields, physics, chemistry, biology, brains, concepts, and concepts only exist after the brains. There are no concepts prior to the brains. They do not exist. They have no quality of existence.
I'm totally fine with that because
but that means God as a concept.
Concepts to mean like basically like correlates to words that we create, like that's fine. Properties are properties are not concepts then.
Well, I'd say intelligibility.
Properties exist, like neurons have properties.
Well, so let's say intelligibility. All intelligibility only exists after brains. There is no intelligibility prior to brains. And so anything that is intelligible, its ability to be intelligible only exists after brains. And
then
so
I literally can't talk, or sorry, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, maybe, again, this is where I always run into the problem here, is if that were true, if intelligibility were after brains, then how can I even talk about or conceptualize or understand in any sense at all what you mean by the word brain?
Because you have one. You have a brain that can conceptualize.
But does the brain have the property of being something that can be conceptualized?
Sure.
Then it's intelligible already, right? It's intelligible before I conceptualize it, because it already had to be something that could be conceptualized before I conceptualize it. And so, yeah, that's why I don't put intelligibility down on the low part of the hierarchy, because the stuff already has to have.
But wait a minute, because I said it could
already has to be intelligible.
Could be intelligible by a brain. So if there's no brain, it can't be intelligible. It's non-intelligible without a brain. So it's only intelligibility.
That means it could be understood by a brain. That doesn't mean a brain needs to exist for it to have that, right? Because something could be understood by a brain even before brains come into existence and then understand it. So intelligibility means can be understood. Things already were intelligible before there's any brains or anything to understand them. Or else they could not be understood when brains come into existence. Because, yeah, I guess by intelligibility, and I know maybe not everyone uses the term this way, I don't mean is understood, I mean can be understood.
I still like the why you call that God part, because it is the answer to the question of why reality is the way it is. Now, I think, of course, the answer to why reality is the way it is a quantum field. That is the fundamental answer. And the fact that I can ask the question, why is the quantum field the way it is it's nature. It's necessarily the case. It's a necessary being of some kind. And then I stop there. And I can conceptualize that it was made by a magical leprechaun. Magical leprechaun made the quantum field, or some kinds, and that's conceptually coherent. It's intelligible. I just think it's false. And I don't think there's any quality of existing things that conceptualization exists in that could refer to why reality is the way it is. There's nothing about that, even though it seems to answer the question, like, why is the quantum field the way it is? Well, the leprechaun did it. I don't think that actually answers the question.
Yeah, but that's because, isn't that because what I call God, you call quantum field?
Well, no, because again, my quantum field is a physical thing. It is an object. It is a thing that literally exists.
Yeah, but what is that? How can it be an object? Because I guess, in what sense is an object? Because I either object means like exists in some place, but a quantum field doesn't exist in some place, or the quantum field you're talking about doesn't, because what place would it exist in? All spaces within it, right? So what is an object? It either is something that exists in some place, or it's something that's like countable, meaning it's like numerable. We can count it as one of a kind of thing.
Sure. I'd say both of those are possible.
Thing, then it has nature or property. So the quantum fieldness, which is the property that the quantum field has, is the fundamental nature of reality on your view then. Or the quantum field itself is, in which case it's not actually an object because it's not countable. Because you're saying it's not like, you couldn't say I guess we're back to this issue of like, are there other possible quantum fields, right? Because I would deny that there are other possible fundamental natures of reality, because possibility is part of reality. It's an aspect of reality. It's not, and I mean reality in my wide sense, right? It's not something that's like prior to reality.
That's the part I think I'd fundamentally disagree with, because I think brute facts are perfectly fine. So I think you can have brute facts, and so you can have a brute fact that this reality was created by quantum fields, and there could be a different reality that has no quantum fields, or there's multiple quantum fields, and that would be fine with me. I think the possibility of those things has no reference to reality. Possibility is not a property in reality. Possibility is our ability to imagine stuff, and it doesn't exist. Possibility doesn't exist anywhere.
Yeah, but then is it true? Is this a fact that it's possible that there could be more than the quantum field that there is? Is that a true factual statement? Meaning,
sure,
that's true in reality.
Sure.
Okay, then how can you at the same time assert that that's true and then say possibility is only a concept and is not real? Because I thought like real meant whatever's a fact. And if possibility is a fact, if a given possibility is a fact, it seems like it's real on your way of talking.
Well, I'd say the fact that it's possible does not make the possibility the case. So it's possible that I'll win $1 million tomorrow, but I won't. And so even it's possible it didn't happen. So it's possible that a magical leprechaun created the universe, But if that is not the case, then it is just not true that it did happen. So the possibility and its actual existence are separate categories. They don't, the actual existence only applies to the things that did happen. And even though the possibility of it occurring, that sentence can be true, it's only actually existing if it did happen. And so possibility seems outside of the realm of truth until it actually occurs.
Yeah, but okay, what do you mean by actual existence now? Because are we back to, but I mean, yeah, is it the same thing we talked about before, where by existence you mean like
causal relation
a thing in the physical world?
Yeah, it has a causal relation in physical world is the most fundamental thing I can think of. So yeah, physical world, causal relation in the physical world.
Yeah, but I guess I'm arguing, and yeah, so maybe the issue is we disagree about whether there are brute facts, right? So I'm arguing any fact needs an explanation. And that's because, like, I want the most robust conception of rationality I can have. And yeah, it seems to me like, and you're kind of saying, no, I can just have a fact with no explanation to it. And yeah, I mean, maybe maybe this is sort of we finally got to the point of like real disagreement here. And yeah, so I guess why I don't accept brute facts, if I'm trying to think through this, is because that just seems to me to like arbitrarily limit what reason is capable of, right? So you want me to be like, hey, I don't accept reason can do this thing, right? But I'm like, I'm super into reason. I love rationality, and I'm a philosopher. So yeah, I don't want to just like be like, I just randomly accept brute facts arbitrarily, right? Like, why accept brute facts? Because I guess since I'm engaging in argumentation, I'm asking why, I'm a person who trusts in reason. If I'm going to say, hey, here we have reached like a limitation where reason we cannot ask a question here, I'm going to want an explanation why I'm like limiting what reason can do.
Well, so that part, I wouldn't say I'm limiting reason, because I say we can definitely ask the question, but does the question have an answer? I'd say no. It's just, the question is incorrect. We can ask the question, but it doesn't mean it has an answer. So I wouldn't say
is the question meaningful?
Sure.
Okay, so if the question is meaningful, I guess what I mean by a meaningful question is a question that makes sense and a question that's motivated by something, therefore. Something is like motivating me to ask that question. And yeah, I agree we can't have an answer in the sense of like, here's a thing with properties, right? Let's put it in a sentence and now our sentence directly corresponds. I agree with that. But yeah, I guess I do think that like if there's a question, something is motivating it.
Sure, I can agree with that.
I'm not going to sort of say like, no, I'm just going to randomly reject that there's something motivating this question.
I'm not sure what you mean by motivating here. So like, I think there are questions that have all wrong answers. So like, if I say which mythical creature made the bed, any answer is going to be wrong. There is no correct answer to that question, because any mythical creature you list doesn't exist. It can't cause the bed. And so if I ask what caused the brute fact, any answer you give is going to be wrong. It's just going to be a false answer, because it's uncaused. And so I can intelligibly ask the question, what caused the universe? But if the universe is a brute fact, any answer I give is going to just be wrong. And so I wouldn't say it's refuting or saying there's a limit to rationality or intelligibility there. I'd say it's just that the things that are intelligible, the intelligible questions, can have all wrong answers.
Yeah, so I guess I'm pretty sure I'm rejecting that intelligible, meaning meaningful questions can have wrong or have all wrong answers. So yeah, I don't think that the question, which mythical creature made the bed, is a meaningful question, because if by bed I mean a bed here in the world we observe, and by mythical creature I mean something that by definition is not in the world we observe, that question just doesn't actually make sense. Like, that's not a meaningful question. That's an incoherent and a confused question.
That's really interesting. So like, if we could come up with an example of a meaningful question that had all wrong answers, would that falsify your worldview?
Yeah, I mean, at least I would need to like rethink things. I mean, I don't know if it, right, because I've never sort of like thought in this direction before, so I'm not sure. But yeah, I would think of like, wow, that's really strange, and I've never thought of that before, so that might be an issue. Yeah.
So if there was one such case, that case could potentially apply to the origin of the universe, in which case it wouldn't necessarily follow that the answer, why is reality the way it is, would have such an answer kind of a reasoning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so because I guess I want to be able to say the question, why is reality the way it is a meaningful question, because otherwise I seem to be just randomly restricting what reason can do. But yes, I feel like any meaningful question, in a sense, has an answer, meaning something motivating it, which would mean for any other meaningful question we could talk about, there should be an answer to it. Like one right answer to it, at least one right answer to it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I can't think of, again, I've never really sort of thought of this issue before, but yeah, I can't think of something that I would grant is a meaningful question that doesn't actually have an answer.
Yeah, and I just came up with this off the top of my head, so I haven't thought of it either.
Right, yeah, I'll have to think about it more. Yeah, it's good. I'm glad we came to it. Yeah.
So we've been going for about an hour and a half. It was a great conversation so far. We do have some questions for the audience, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to think about that more because I think it's
a great way. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
I'm totally going to use that to try and counter Platonism from now on. On the right, can you please restate your position for the latecomers?
Yeah. So I mean, again, it's kind of like a super, I guess. Yeah. Let me go back to the basic position, right? So we've like talked through it, which hopefully is like clarified it in some sense, or at least. But yeah, the basic position is. My position is that I think that why is reality the way that it is, or why is reality meaningful or intelligible, means can be understood, is a meaningful question. And I also think that's a meaningful question. It must have an answer. So I think there's a reason why reality is the way that it is. And then using the sort of way of speaking that people did in late antiquity, I call that God. And that people still do within traditions that are based on that, like Eastern Orthodoxy or Catholicism, which have theologies that go back that far, right? Using that way of speaking, I call that God. Maybe other people don't, right? Some people might call it nothingness. I don't have a problem with names, right? But yeah, there's a reason why things are the way they are. That's basically my position, and that's what I call God. That reason why.
Awesome. Nicodemus asked, if God is not any particular way, then how does it have any relationship to anything?
Strictly speaking, it doesn't. So, right, Neoplatonists are like clear about this. So is Thomas Aquinas, who like follows in this tradition. Like, God does not have any real relations to anything. And so, yeah, there's ways we talk like it has relations, and there's reasons why we want to do that. But yeah, it's not like a thing that's related to other things, and it has sort of relations in that way. So yeah, that's granted. And right, to fully answer this, you'd have to go into a whole discussion of like what is a relation and so on. But yeah, basically doesn't have relationships to things, although it is a reason why, right? It's a reason why, in a sense, that's a relationship, I guess, or at least you could call it that. But yeah, it's not the kind of relationship of like one thing to another thing or one entity to another entity.
Gotcha. Ivan Van Veen, what about a representation of reality, a dream, the phenomenology of reality, which I would also include as being reality, and it is not material as far as I know. So he's saying that there's things in reality that are not material. I think all those things are material. I think dreams are material. I think everything is material. I'm a hardcore materialism. So from my position, I think dreams would be
my position isn't. So I'm totally fine with those being real and aren't material. Yeah. I think they need a material substrate, but yeah.
All right. Winston's mom. Talk about Anselm's argument and the professor's opinion. Is it possible to conceive, Anselm said, of a being that which nothing greater can be conceived?
Yeah. So good, because I wrote a article on Anselm. I mean, it was years ago now, back in 2012. So yeah, Anselm explicitly denies, and this is where he's different from like Descartes or Leibniz. Anselm explicitly denies that we can actually conceive God. I think it's chapter 15 of the Proslogion. He says, that which nothing greater can be conceived is beyond anything we can conceive. And that's why he words it that way too. So it's not the greatest possible being. That's not Anselm's wording. Anselm words it as that than which nothing greater can be thought, but it's actually greater than anything can be thought. And so on Anselm's view, it's not really possible to conceive of that than which nothing greater can be thought. It's beyond anything we can conceive.
Gotcha. And where to go? JJ asked an interesting question. So it's a reference to Russell's paradox, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, that any set necessarily going to be incomplete. And so there must necessarily be at least one question that is meaningful that doesn't have an answer. So there's got to be one, logically, if we grant that Russell's paradox is true.
Yeah, I don't grant that like everything can be interpreted in terms of set theory. So like, yeah, and yeah, I mean, I guess I don't understand, like, yeah, maybe this is a good where to look, but I would not interpret Russell's paradox in that way, right? And I don't understand it though well enough to be able to like say anything helpful. But yeah, I'll look into that because this is the sort of, this is what you and I came to here, so that's something maybe I need to look into actually.
Is the set of all sets that are not members of themselves a member of itself? That is Russell's paradox.
Yeah, but it's just like I don't really understand how to answer that because I don't understand set theorem well enough to really understand what the paradox is, I think. But gotcha. Yeah, I should look into that because maybe you're right. That's one of these meaningful questions that doesn't have an answer. I don't know.
Big Bad Mama, if he is saying reality is like God, do you believe everything takes part in God since reality includes everything?
Yes. Yeah, and that's like, again, this is pretty mainline in traditional forms of Christianity. I forget if it's like scriptural or if it's in the liturgy somewhere, but there's this saying like, God is that in which we live and move and have our being, right? So, yeah, that's fine. Everything is in God, yeah.
Gotcha. Do Neoplatonists like the theory of the holographic universe? Seems like it would look sexy to me if I was a Platonist.
Yeah, I don't know what that theory is, so sorry.
Holographic universe, it's the position that all information within a 3D space can be represented on a 2D sphere, and therefore everything in our universe is simply a hologram produced by interactions on the 2D sphere, like a black hole or something.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't like that because it's just like, what do we mean by hologram? What do we mean by, like all these terms would have to be defined, and then probably we aren't using hologram in the same sense. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, because I still don't know what that means ultimately. Like, so yeah, I mean, I guess to be fair, like I just can't answer this question because I would really have to like look at what I don't understand what you just said, basically.
Gotcha. Nothingness asks, ask his thoughts on henosis in Neoplatonism. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so henosis is this idea of becoming one. So in the really late Neoplatonists like Proclus or Pseudo-Dionysius, the ones who are like super religious as well, there's this idea of like, I can sort of, in a way, identify with the one or the fundamental nature of reality itself. And they call that process by which I do that henosis, because henosis just literally means oneness or and they mean it to like becoming one. So yeah, I'm fine with that, right? Like in my view, right? Like, what do we mean by a self exactly? Well, I can identify as like this body, and yeah, that's right. But I can also identify as something like human nature maybe is really what I am. Or I say like what I am is ultimately like an expression of reality itself or of God. And when I identify with that, that's just like saying, in a sense, I am God, or the truest version of the self or the truest meaning of self is God. And so that idea of henosis sort of goes with that. So yeah, that has to do with theories about like what selfhood is in the Neo-Platonic way of thinking about things.
Gotcha. Zachary Parker asks, regarding a meaningful question with no correct answers, would Schrodinger's cat or maybe any paradox apply?
Yeah, So Schrodinger's cat, I understand more than this like set theory stuff. Although, yeah, not that I like understand it, but yeah, I don't really find that to be a meaningful question with no answer, because we actually have the answer, right? We know why we can't answer the question. So like, we have answered the question because we have an explanation for why we can't answer the question. And so I think that is an answer to the question, right? When I have the theory that explains why I can't answer this question, that is the answer to the question. So I don't see that as like a problem, right? It seems like I have a question. motivated here, and I get an explanation, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'm cool with that question now, because now I know why I can't answer it. And in a way, I think that's actually what's happening in a different sense with the question of like, why is reality the way that it is? Because again, the answer to that is super weird. It's like, it's something that I can't really say exists or doesn't exist. It's not one or many. We can't really even talk about it. We can't even really understand what it is. And so, yeah, it's a really weird answer that Neoplatonists are giving to this question. Why is reality the way that it is? But it's still like an answer of some sorts. And yeah, so I'm fine. I guess I would say Schrodinger's paradox has an answer. It's the explanation of why this paradox occurs.
So if like true randomness existed, would that be an example?
I don't know what true randomness would mean. I mean, yeah, if there's a way to make intelligible what true randomness means, and that is the answer, then it's intelligible, then it's fine. Yeah.
Well, so like, is randomness determined by nothing? There's nothing that determines this action to happen, yet it still happens.
Meaning there's just no explanation at all for it.
Yes. True randomness, completely undetermined by anything.
Yeah, no, I don't accept that. Right. I mean, yeah. So again, like, I don't see how true randomness could ever be an answer because I can't even conceptualize what that means. But I don't think that is the answer to Schrodinger's cat. Is true
right.
The answer.
It was.
Right?
This was an unrelated question. So this is actually from a follow-up poll in physics called "The Fundamental Attitudes of Quantum Mechanics" by Schlosshauser.
Okay.
That's about how to pronounce his name. But the consensus among physicists right now is that randomness is irreducible fundamental nature of reality that's not caused by anything. There's actual randomness that actually exists.
Yeah, I guess I just want to be really, and I haven't studied any of this, but I want to be clear, like, what is the definition of randomness? Because I know like physicists like define their terms. There's usually like a mathematical way of stating it. And so, yeah, I assume like mathematical randomness, if that's what we're talking about, is actually an intelligible concept. It's not like just pure nothingness. It's an intelligible idea. And so yeah, I don't know because I don't know what they mean by randomness.
Gotcha. And La Cantina del Adio. If being can't come from non-being, can anyone say that the world began?
Okay, so yeah, so how the Neoplatonists, they accept being can't, something can't come from nothing, right? Being can't come from non-being. In a way, that's the same thing as like for every being, there has to be an answer to why it is the way it is, right? So can anyone say that the world begun? You cannot say it begun if you mean like first there was nothing and then there's the world. No, that doesn't make any sense. And the Christian Neoplatonists, like even St. Augustine, I think book 11 of the Augustine's Confessions, he goes into a long thing about how like these people try to talk like there's something like first there's nothingness and then that was there for like thousands of years and then finally like God created the world and Augustine is like, no, that makes no sense at all because it makes no sense to talk about like there being something like time or empty space before God creates. And so the only way you can say that the world begun or had a beginning is in the sense that it's limited, like the temporality of it is limited in some way. It doesn't mean it began in the way like anything else we talk about. So yeah, when in traditional Christian theology, when you say that the world had a beginning, you don't mean a beginning in time. You don't mean it had a beginning in the way that anything else had a beginning. There's like St. Thomas Aquinas wrote a whole like book on like what that actually means because he's got to sort of change the normal meaning of the term beginning in order to make that work.
Gotcha. John from America asks, what constitutes something as a mythical creature simply not existing in reality as a mythical creature?
Okay, so I guess, yeah, if you want my, and maybe Tom, your answer to this is different. I guess how I would define a mythical creature, like what constitutes something as a mythical creature. So I'm going to want to go back to like what I mean by a myth is a story. Mythos is just the Greek word for story. And so a creature that sort of is created in stories and only appears in stories and not in the world we perceive around us. that's what I would call a mythical creature. So it's created out of stories, only appears in stories, doesn't appear as a creature in the world that we actually perceive with our senses.
Gotcha. I think that's it for the questions. We've been going for about 2 hours. It was a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
Yeah, let me see. So I have an academia.edu page. So I think it's academia.edu/Michael Wiitala or something like that. I mean, I would just get on there and search for my name, Michael Wiitala. But yeah, other than that, no, I mean, other than, yeah, thank you. I'll start to think about, yeah, are there sort of questions that I would consider meaningful that don't have answers? I mean, yeah, this is a really great conversation. So thanks.
Oh, and would that be different saying they don't have answers versus they have all wrong answers?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I should write this down right after I get off here so I don't forget. Right. So meaningful questions that have all wrong answers. Okay. Yeah, that's what I got to think about more. So yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.